Hi, and welcome back to Rose Connections. I hope that you enjoyed the last video I did about what are radical reflections. Um, I got some feedback from some friends on it, and I really appreciate, I think, how thoughtful people have been about why knowing yourself is such a huge part of leadership. And I think what many people then crave, and the reason why I'm making this video is, what do I mean by relationship reboot, which is another component of what I view as an effective leadership framework. And one in which, these are all things that are interconnected. All of these concepts that I talk about and all of them that I integrate into my coaching paradigm and coaching framework are all interdependent on each other, which I think interdependence is really at the core of what I'm talking about when I get to relationship reboot. And relationship reboot, again, is just that shorthand way of talking about transforming how we view our relationships with other people. And by, let's for a moment just talk about what I mean by relationships, because I think a lot of people, when they hear the term relationship, they are thinking, romantic relationship, who you sleep with and who you marry and who you have a home with and those types of things. But yet we are in relationship with one another constantly, and we have multiple relationships across the board. And I don't mean that we have multiple romantic relationships, but I don't not mean that, if that makes sense. What I intend for us to really look at when we look at relationships is how we relate to one another, and really shifting how we choose to show up in relationship with one another. And so at its core, I think one of the other videos where I talk about there are as many forms of love as there are moments in time. And one of the things I love about that concept is the fact that every individual that you meet, every individual that you form relationship with, creates a different dynamic. They reflect back to you a different version of yourself than the person that you just talked to 10 minutes ago, or the person that you're going to talk to a month from now. And each person is sort of reflecting one another in that moment in time. And some folks are lucky or cursed enough to constantly see the same reflection always with that partner. But this is not, again, just about romantic partners. This is about father and son, and cousin and aunt, and all of these different family dynamics. It's also your coworkers and your friends and the people that you play intramural soccer with. All of those relationships matter, and they help construct who you are, and they help you see yourself and redefine yourself by who you are within that relationship with one another. And so when I talk about relationship reboot, at the very core, that's actually one of the biggest things that I'm trying to get at, is recognizing that we have relationship on so many different levels, on so many different spectrums, on in so many different spheres of our existence, and a lot of them are overlapping with one another. The relationship that we have with our child, for example, is going to be informed by the relationship we have with that child's, co-parent. Whether that be a husband or a wife or a former partner or an estranged partner or a stranger that you just don't know. That is going to impact how you define that parent-child relationship and who you show up as in that parent-child relationship. And so when we are reflecting, that dynamic within one another, we're also not necessarily accessing the rest of ourselves in that relationship. And so we have relationships with many other types of different people. I don't know about you, but I have two very different kids. And so a really good example of this is I have an equal amount of love for both of my sons. Yet I have very different relationships with each of them. You know, last night I was helping my youngest because he cut his finger doing something teenager-y stupid. And you know, and I got a hug at the end of that. And that's something I would not necessarily be engaged with at the same degree, the same level, the same type of dynamic with my oldest son, who actually doesn't live with us. So by the very virtue of the fact that we live in the same household as one kid versus another kid, that changes that dynamic. And so just being aware that there can be shifts and changes in that dynamic. And likewise, as we all grow and develop and shift and change over time, we gain experience, we gain trauma, we recover from trauma, we move to a new city, we date someone new. All of these experiences help transform who we are and thus who we show up as in relationship. Which is why, you know, one of the other things I want to normalize with relationship reboot is that your relationships are going to grow and change over time. Because you grow and change over time, and they grow and change over time. And we all grow at different rates, and we're all working on different stuff at different times. And so it is entirely normal for your relationship to shift. I have some friends that I know out in the Midwest who made an announcement recently that they were shifting their relationship from living with one another to living apart, but they still loved each other. They still cared a lot for each other. Just living together was not going to suit their needs anymore. And I thought that was such a beautiful and magical announcement to make, because they are setting an intention that they want to stay together, that they want to remain in relationship with each other, but they want to change how that dynamic works so that it works better for each of them than what they had originally planned. And I thought that that's actually a rather mature way to look at the shifts and changes that happen in our relationships over time. They acknowledge that two different people are growing at two different rates in two different directions, maybe, you know, parallel directions, but still they have their own separate identities and hopes and ambitions, and they're shifting how they view those individual ambitions as joint ventures. And I thought that that was really smart. Likewise, with relationship reboot, one of the other things, and that sort of dovetails, because one of the other things that I try to get at with all of this is that relationships not only shift and grow with time, but we can change how we talk about our relationships. We can change how we choose to encounter conflict with our relationships. As a mediator, I was a mediator in private practice for about 5 years, and I did mostly divorce mediation. I did a lot of elder abuse, and I did some community-based stuff. And what it all comes down to is, in our very basic nature, we make assumptions about people. We lack information, so we either go with what we see on the surface level, which is, you know, not necessarily a bad thing to do. None of these things are bad on their own, but we look at what is there on the surface and we then make a judgment about that, so that we fill in the blanks of what we don't know is under the surface. So instead of getting to know someone, earning that trust so that they open up and then they become a little bit more vulnerable and connected with us, we have a tendency to fill in the blanks on our own, and we create our own stories about people. So relationship reboot is also looking at, stop making assumptions about what that person's story is, and also, when you do learn about that person's story, you know, remember that it's also not your story to tell. And I think that's one of the other things that we get at. I did a post recently about gossip and the damage that gossip can do. And a lot of what happens with gossip is, you know, we're filling in the blanks with our own biases, and we're filling in the blanks with our own narrative that makes us appear better, us appear more superior, appears superior to somebody else. But in the end, we're all just telling stories. And so we need to become better storytellers for ourselves. And we also need to shift how we talk about ourselves to other people. You know, when you go through those radical reflections and you start recognizing who you really are, you kind of want to declare that for the world. But what happens is a lot of us, I think, tend to focus on the fault that we faced in that relationship, or not that relationship, but we tend to focus on what went wrong for us rather than what went right and what is the story that we want people to know now. And so sometimes we deliberately leave a lot of open blanks so that people can fill in those blanks however they want. But we need to be more mindful of how that impacts us. All right, I am going to fix this because I'm sure that this is annoying you as much as it's annoying me. All right, only a couple more minutes left, I promise. So all of that then comes down to this idea of recognizing that we can shift and change the narrative of our relationships by the stories that we choose to tell about those relationships. What stories do we tell about our ex? Do we tell the story, that makes our ex look good? When they were really a bad actor? Or are we telling the story of them looking bad when they were really not all that bad? Those things matter. You know, how do we talk about estranged friends or people who believe differently than us or look differently than us? So recognizing how those stories that we tell about other people impact us and the collateral impacts around us. And finally, one of the last things, and again, this comes from mediation, this comes from my sociology background, this comes from my policy background, is we need to shift the narrative to eliminate the illusions of separation. We are far more interconnected and far more interdependent than I think any of us really recognize or actively celebrate, or actively seek to enhance. And interdependence is this concept of what happens to me has an impact on you. And nowhere do I see this more often than, especially in the social justice world. And I think this is what a lot of social justice warriors are trying to get us to recognize and understand, that we are far more interdependent and we are far more susceptible to what happens to one of us happens to all of us. And I think COVID is probably one of the best examples of that. We had a recent incident where a swingers convention took place, and a bunch of people, then I think, 41 cases came out of, confirmed cases of COVID came out of that event. And, it's bringing up these really interesting conversations about where does, my freedom end and my responsibility to you begin? And vice versa. When can I finally say, no, I don't have to be responsible for you? And I think right now as a society, we're trying to figure out where that goes. In a trauma-informed society, in a heart-centered society, we are going to put that at a very, very healthy balance of recognizing that the actions that I take, even if I think that they only impact me, actually impact those around me. So, when I choose to go to an event with a ton of people, I am now also making that choice for a bunch of people I don't even know I'm going to meet tomorrow. Meaning, people I might pass in the grocery store, or people, the person who's handing me my Starbucks, in the drive-through. So I think COVID is giving us a very real life example of what interdependence actually is, because also we are seeing the interdependence within our economy, within our police systems, within all of these different and varying systems, and within the system, between the systems themselves. And so recognizing that, what happens on this cog of the wheel can really affect what happens on this one over here is, I think, a massive part of the awakening that we all need to do, and a big relationship reboot that we need to do for a larger portion of our world. Because I think a lot of us act in a vacuum and think that, the actions that we have here aren't going to matter to someone over there. And in reality, we are a far more connected world, and we need to start adjusting ourselves to that world and to that reality, and to reinforce healthy interdependence, not codependence, but healthy interdependence, so that we all operate a lot more harmoniously than we have in the past. So, if this is something that is, please comment, let me know what you think about everything that I've said here today, or the other videos, or how these relate, or ask any questions that you want. I really want to encourage that interaction here. If you are interested, I am actually offering, I'm going to be offering some discounts at the beginning of the year for new leadership coaching. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email, shoot me a message on any social media, and let's talk about what your leadership coaching needs are, what your training needs might be for your organization, to really help grasp this larger concept of this bigger world that we're creating together. So thank you again for being on the journey. Please like and subscribe, share to any of your friends if this resonates with you, and I look forward to our next time together. Take care.